Welcome to the Trailbreaker Podcast. I'm Aaron Feinberg. In this podcast, I explore what it takes to be a trailbreaker. Through intimate conversations with people carving new paths across the landscapes of business, art, and sport, we dig in on how to excel across seemingly disparate endeavors. What drives people who manage to succeed multidimensionally? Is it how they think? Is it meticulous planning and follow-through? Or is it some measure of delusional optimism? My guests today are Abiel Gutierrez and Andres Santos, co-founders of Comun, a fintech company empowering immigrants and their families to achieve upward mobility through financial inclusion. We talked about why it's important to help others carry the load, how a rapidly scaling business can coexist with family, personal health, and playing drums in a band, and why you should always do the hard thing when it's the right thing. Morning, guys, and thanks so much for joining me on the show today.
Thanks for having us.
Excited to be here.
We have a long history, Abiel, you and I think you even have a longer history with Andres. But today we get to talk about your new venture, Comun. But before we do, why don't we have you guys each introduce yourselves, and then we'll talk a little bit about what the company does at a high level, and then maybe get into a little bit of who you are as leaders. So yeah, Abiel, why don't you start with sharing a little bit about who you are?
Of course, yeah. Born and raised in Monterrey, Mexico, just like Andres, actually. I guess that's why we became a good co-founder pair. I came to the States for college at Stanford. I did computer science. And I was the same year as the Brex founders, although they dropped out early to start that company. I was connected to Enrique, so I was lucky to be able to join them pretty early, pre-launch, as an engineer. Stayed there for 3 years, and an amazing journey of lots of fundraising, headcount growth, revenue growth, very exhilarating. The last year of my time at Brex, it was COVID. I was back home at Mexico with my parents, and I realized it was a perfect time to quit, to explore ideas, to figure out what to build, because I wanted to build a business since high school, pretty much. Um, in that process, I met Andres. He had the idea for Comun, and I'll let him talk about that.
Thanks.
So on my side, as Abiel was saying, also from Monterrey, I started my career as an entrepreneur when I was 17. Started my first company and did that through my entire college experience. I After I graduated, I ended up working for one of my biggest suppliers, this company, which is like a multinational company with operations around the world. And I helped the leadership team there with several things, like the IPO of the company. Um, they raised about $1 billion from the debt market. I was doing a little bit of everything. And that's how I got exposure into what we're doing at Comun. This is a company that has some of the best brands across Latin America. And they realized that they were getting a lot of traction in the US, mainly by immigrants who were buying their products because they had nostalgia. And part of what I was tasked to do was help that part of the business grow, which got me exposed to thousands of small, like, bodega owners and mom and pop stores that were trying to make it work here in the US. And that's what prompted me to quit and build something for them. I ended up quitting and coming to the States. I did an MBA at MIT. I spent most of my time working in venture during that MBA. It was COVID. It was not the typical MBA experience. So I ended up working at a venture fund in New York for most of that time, and I graduated to start Comun.
Amazing. And you said something, Andres, I think you said the folks are buying products from because of nostalgia. Is that what you said?
Yeah, so if you're an immigrant and you grew up with certain products in, let's say, in Mexico, it can be especially food products. They tend to have such an emotional aspect to that. And you move to the US and you don't have access to those anymore. So there's some brokers that basically what they do is just they take the products in Mexico, they buy them in bulk, and they find a way to send them to the US. And there's a huge market of Hispanic retail stores that sell them. So my job was seeing how to grow that side of the market.
Awesome. Thanks for clarifying. So, what is Comun at the high level?
So if you go to a typical neighborhood, a Hispanic neighborhood, let's say an example could be Jackson Heights in Queens, and you walk around the block, you're gonna find that there's about 10 different stores that offer financial services today. Those stores tend to offer something like a little bit of everything, but mostly predatory services like um, check cashing, international remittances, um, and payday loans. Our goal was to take that concept and bring it to a digital age where you can basically offer something as close to free as possible, in many cases for free. And we knew that people were being scammed by many of these players and that the experience was horrible. You have to do really long lines, and you tend to pay more than $1,000 per year just to get access to the services. So we knew that there was a better option for them, and for many reasons they weren't accessing those better options. So our first thesis was, let's take this kind of brick and mortar experience and bring it online.
Okay. And for those who might not know, what's a definition of an international remittance?
Just
Uh,
sending money to a different country. Um, Mostly, it's your family members if you're an immigrant, and is actually what underpins most of the immigration journeys. It's folks wanting to build a better future, not only for themselves but to provide for their families back home.
Amazing. And if I get any of this wrong, you guys correct me for sure. But so let's say I am an immigrant, comes to the States, I'm working, I want to send money home. Uh, I have traditionally used some of these smaller, brick and mortar places. Is like Western Union an example of kind of how it used to be done or how it has been done?
yeah, Western Union is the biggest player in that legacy space, what I would call like the brick and mortar agent based transactions. And if you look at the Western Union, traditionally these are the most expensive options to send money back home. They are located where most of our community lives, so they're accessible in that front, but they're really, really expensive. So you pay from 6% to even 10% of the transaction, depending on how you send the money.
And to add more context on the banking friction, um, so for example, I came to the States for college in 2014. Um, I got an internship during my freshman summer, so I got a social security number. Um, that hasn't been enough to get open an account digitally with Bank of America or Chase. And I try pretty much, well, especially since starting Comun, I try on a yearly basis just to see if they've changed that. And even after having had a social security number for 10 years, the fact that I'm not a US citizen means that I have to go into the bank branch. Um, Now, if you take many other immigrants, a lot of them don't speak English. They don't feel comfortable going into a bank branch. Uh, you know, there's they have much higher barriers than what I have, and even myself, I can't. These banks have market caps of 200, 300 billion dollars, and still don't solve for our use cases, right? So that's pretty wild.
Yeah, and so as you're saying, Comun provides this digital platform to allow folks who, for all those reasons you just mentioned, you know, don't feel comfortable or are not able to use or not allowed to use the more traditional, modalities. So is it allowing them similar to like Venmo or PayPal to then send money electronically, or so? What are some of the other functions or products that Comun offers?
So we wanted to make sure we were building a solution for the needs of the everyday, like the day to day. And so for this community, they needed a card to pay for things in the US. They needed an account. They needed more than just an international transfer. So the first step that we took was to create that. We allow people to open a full bank account, partnering with a bank in New York. That bank account allows them to get direct deposit, allows them to receive funds from other bank accounts or from employers or from service providers or anything, and they can do whatever they want with that money, including sending some of it back home to their family members. So the idea is to bank the individual in the US and through that help them take care of their families.
And I guess something that also goes unnoticed is a lot of immigrants pay monthly maintenance fees. So if your bank balance is below a certain amount, especially with incumbents, you have to pay $12, $15 a month. Um, Not everyone is aware of that because they don't pay that to their banks. But again, there's not a lot of empathy with the situation that immigrants go through, right?
Amazing. And talk to us a little bit about where the company started in terms of, size of how many folks are working with. Where are you now? What's been sort of, you've had some pretty exponential growth over the last little bit here, and I know you made a little bit of a pivot too and how you were approaching the business. But yeah, give us a little sense of sort of like on the internal side of the business, sort of where it started and what's happened recently.
So we started in early 2022. Um, and it took us, I think, about 2 years to get it right, to get it to a point where we were scaling as we did in 2024. So the first 2 years we were pretty lean. We had a team of, um, I think, between the first 2 years about 10 people, mostly engineers. We started using a lot of what was popular in fintech at the time, which was banking as a service platforms, where you don't necessarily have to build a direct integration to a partner bank. And this is more technical, but for many reasons, we decided that that wasn't the right thing for us. So that was the pivot that you were mentioning in 2023. In 2023, we decided to kind of build our own banking infrastructure and connect directly to a partner bank. That was a hard experience that we went through where for about 7, 8 months we were building. And we finally emerged from that in November of 2023. So it's been about a year and a couple of months since that. Um, and it's been, as you said, pretty exponential since then. We grew about 100x our revenue in 2024, and we're now 30 full-time employees.
Amazing. And I think it's worth, we talked a little bit offline, but I think it's worth talking about the place that you had to get to where, you had the original approach to the business where you're building on top of something that already existed. And then that pivotal moment where you're like, we got to do something different and build our own from scratch. What'd that do to you both internally, individually? How was it to get to that decision as a pair, or how was it dealing with investors, the whole kind of thing?
Um, so we start again. We started with banking as a service. I guess that's the term for the initial approach that we took. Um, I think a big lesson that we had after going through this migration was don't pay too much attention to the narrative in the industry. And I guess when we took that initial decision, um, the VC market was still frothy. There was a lot of investment for fintechs. That created the banking as a service category, which basically says you can offload a lot of the complexities of running a bank program to this middleware. You focus a little bit more on the design, on the go to market that gives you speed to test your market hypothesis, which is true. But the more unique the solution that you want to build, or the more unique your ICP or your target customer, the harder it's going to be for that middleware to cater to the needs of your customers, right? Um, and we learned that the hard way by launching and seeing a lot of friction points across our product and not having the ability to fix it. Um, that was a big lesson. Basically, trying to be a little bit more independent minded, not getting carried away by what the industry is saying. Because another one of the narratives uh, around banking as a service was that doing the opposite, so basically building your own infrastructure, was too hard, too complicated, very expensive, and not worth it at all for a seed stage company. And I mean, now with the benefit of hindsight, looking at the 100x revenue growth in the last year, we were like, that was completely worth it. And so I think from a cultural perspective within the team, we gained a lot of appreciation for taking the hard path. Obviously, knowing what the benefit, like having a lot of clarity about what the benefits were going to be. Um, it was not an easy decision. We had to lay off some team members because we needed to extend runway, um, and we were gonna stop growing. So for that period in which we were building, certain roles no longer made sense. Um, but again, I think for me it taught me that when you have a setback, you have to understand how your response to that setback will put you at an advantage on the long run. Because maybe in the short and medium term, we weren't going to catch up with competitors that were still going full steam ahead on banking as a service. But we had to make sure that whatever decision we took in the long run, it was going to make sense. And right now, I think we're happy with the decision. So.
Yeah, and I think I'm curious. Obviously, hindsight has shown you best decision ever. Were you getting signal early on that it was the right path, or were you in the void of going, "Gosh, we hope we're going to keep going, and these are setbacks. We still feel like this is the right move, but we're not getting a lot of signal to confirm that yet," or was it pretty clear from the get go?
Do you mean from customers? From
From anywhere, right? So obviously, you lay people off, you pivot the approach to the business, you're tackling things in a way in which everybody else has said doesn't work or isn't doing. So there's like this again, and using the trailbreaker metaphor, so you're sort of plowing into a new trail that no one else has been on. So I guess I'm asking is, as you are moving down that line, were you getting signal pretty quick, like, yes, this is the way to go? Or did you have to stay in that sort of doubtful, uncomfortable place for a while before you started seeing the signs?
So for about 8 months or 7 months, it was we had zero signal, and it was all based on what we believed was the right thing to do. Um, because we didn't have the product live, so we were building it, and we knew how better it was going to be to have the flexibility with this new infrastructure to build the right product. But and we had some certainty that what we were building was worth building, because we had that customer before. We made a lot of we had a lot of interviews, and like we met a lot of customers, so like we had as much certainty as we could. But at the same time, like there were a ton of unknowns where we just really didn't know if we would encounter more roadblocks once we launched than what we were imagining we would.
Yeah, I would add that we saw the traction at the top of funnel with our first launch, right? But our ability to turn that into engagement and revenue um, wasn't great because of the limitations from our first, middleware vendor. Um, but because of that traction and just because of how much spent time we spent looking at the target market, at least I personally had a lot of conviction that this is a market that is very much worth serving, that is huge, that is underserved across every category in financial services. And since the first approach didn't work, to me, like this was the only option. So there was not, you know, I think we made the decision, we committed, and that was it. Yes, we weren't sure, but I think both of us were so committed to serving this market, and we we knew what the opportunity was. I think I wasn't sure this second attempt was going to be the right one, but there was probably going to be a third one if this one didn't work. So
Yeah.
I think that's a theme that comes out in a couple different parts of your business, right? Just doing the right thing because it's the right thing, and it's might be the hard thing, and it might be a thing that no one's wanted to touch, but it's the right thing and for people who need it. And I think that's it seems to have been peppered through everything you've done and continue to do. So it's amazing. And it seems like too I see again, offline we discussed a little bit about some of your teammates, and they have posted really nice things online. I don't think you're bribing them. I think they genuinely are pretty ecstatic about both working for Comun and also working for you guys as leaders. And I think just curious of how you keep that culture alive within the company as it's growing. So it's that 30 now, right?
Yeah, that's sturdy. I So on that front, I think there's been a lot of iteration on the culture that we want to build, especially before we went through this transition, and now. Um, I feel like we're kind of running a very different company. In some ways, we were still kind of in the era of the frothy 2021 market where capital is cheap, and um, so like we would make excuses for people more often than not, instead of being very um, have really high expectations on everyone. We weren't being very thoughtful, I would say, on the recruiting side as well. Not as much as we are now. Um, so we did have like a kind of a very different shift once we were in this kind of war war mode mentality in some ways. Um, Everything changed from then, and I'm really happy that we went through that, because now we have a team that is very talented, number one, like extremely smart, very ambitious, um, at the same time very humble, um, and with a growth mindset. So I think we now have a culture that is like filled with top talent. Now the way we got here, in most cases, it's mainly on the recruiting side. We're very thoughtful on who gets to join, and how we evaluate like that raw talent that I'm talking about.
I, I I will add. I think Andres helped me personally in getting to this, either way of thinking about management or the culture. Going back to his point around the frothy 2021, like in self reflection, I my only experience as a manager was at Brex in hypergrowth as a middle manager. So you can always play bad cop with the executives, when dealing with your team. And it's an environment where like the team is growing so quickly and candidates have offers from like 10 different companies. And I think especially in engineering, like, people were, and I'm not talking about Brex, but like the culture in Silicon Valley was one around like divas a bit. And so, I I sort of responded to that by not maybe not having the highest bar possible. But Andres comes from a different background, different type of company, and so I think that balanced out very well. Another thing that I think was important at the start, I hired a few friends from college, from day zero basically of Comun, and so it's people with that I've known for 10 years. We've worked together on academic projects 8 years ago, so there's a lot of mutual respect, and I think that keeps you honest as a leader, right? And forces you to have, to be intellectually honest and have good self awareness. And I think people appreciate that in our company culture.
That's a great point, because I would say that the first 15 employees of Comun, um, I would consider them future CEOs for sure. Like they're future founders in many ways. They're people that are very product minded. That even if they're in, let's say, an engineer, they're more likely than not to think more holistically about the problem they're solving, and not just on the technical implementation. So that's been one of our key assets. Like that allows us to move really fast. It's something that is really hard to replicate. It means um, like hiring new engineers takes longer than for other companies, but for sure, like that is our superpower today.
Yeah, and having first met you, Abiel, when you were at Brex, and in getting a chance to be your coach and watching your growth. The humility has always been there. The growth mindset. I remember us talking about that kind of stuff. Your first foray into management, and watching how you've held on. I mean, you continue to evolve and grow and mature and be more seasoned, but you've retained those qualities for sure. And then, you introducing me to Andres when I came in to help you both, and seeing the compliment. I mean, he obviously, Andres, you have the same characteristics, but you guys have these complementary skill sets in some ways, some overlap, and I feel like together you seem to rise each other up, and serve as really great thought partners for each other. And then when we would have three-way conversations, it just felt like, um, you know, at the core. And it's funny because I actually thought you guys knew each other longer than just over the last handful of years. I thought you were childhood friends for some reason, because that's the vibe and the flow that you guys have. It exudes.
I
Yeah, no.
when I give people advice, people that want to start a company and are looking for co-founders, I think the number one thing or number one piece of advice that I give is you need to have intellectual admiration with your co-founder. And in my case with Andres, I feel that 50% of the time he convinces me to change my mind, and 50% of the time I convince him. And so I think that well, I'll speak for myself. That gives me a lot of appreciation for the partnership. And another thing I tell people is like not to be like weird or anything, but if Andres dies, I think the potential of Comun is truly capped. And so you want to work with a partner like that, right? Of course. So yeah.
No, I feel the same way. I feel the same way, and so it's funny, but we met when we were both ideating. So we were like 100% in the mode of building a company. We were introduced by an American friend. So even though Abiel pretty much lived like a mile away from my house, we didn't meet each other in Monterrey. We met in New York. Um, and at that time, Abiel was living in Monterrey. I was living in New York, and I told him, if you're serious, I think by the second call, I told him, if you're serious, come to New York and let's meet in person and let's see what happens. Um, and he came to New York. The idea was to spend maybe three days with me, ideating and like going deeper into the problem space. And he ended up staying for maybe 6 or 8 weeks, living with me and my wife in my living room. Like right away it was very clear, and we would have like very deep conversations. My wife would come in and she would ask me like, who are you talking about? Like, are you cheating or something? Like, because it was such so personal and like so deep. But I always knew, well, coming into this company specifically, my first company, I was a solo founder. I knew I wanted like a true partner, like a someone that where I can share the burden, the emotional burden of starting a company. And Abiel has such a unique way of thinking, that I think really aligned with my way of thinking and my mental models, and it made a lot of sense. And we have very very complementary skill sets. So it's been a great journey.
And I don't think it's quite over for you guys. I mean, it's awesome. Are there any products or parts of Comun that we didn't touch on that you feel like would be good to get out into the world? If so, let's hear them.
So there's several things that we do better than most when it comes to serving our population. One thing is we make it really easy for you to apply, even if you don't have a social security number, which is the case for my wife, for example. You can apply with an ID from your home country. There's a lot of technology behind it that allows us to do that. There's a lot of compliance behind it that allows us to do that. Once you're in the account, we allow you to deposit cash at more than 100,000 locations at the best prices. We allow you to send money to 17 countries in Latin America at very low prices, where your family members can either receive the money in a bank account or they can go to a merchant, let's say a Walmart or something like that, where they can withdraw the cash um, right there. So it's a very comprehensive service for immigrants that have a family that is cross border in nature.
And I would
And
add, we have customer support that is available 24/7 across email, phone, or in-app chat. Um, and something that is very unique about how we build product, you know, we're serve our target market is big, so we have different personas in our platform. Some of those are not very sophisticated, and so when we launched early on, they would reach out to customer support even before filling out the application with like very basic questions. And so we have to be very diligent in how we design every single product. We use a lot of tutorial videos. I think we use more copy in the flows than your average service. Um, because again, and to no, it's not only I think that some of our customers are not very sophisticated. It's also a financial service that we offer, right? So the bar for where the trust has to be from the user is very high, right? And the more clarity you give them, the more comfortable they're going to feel.
Amazing. And it seems like you've been focused mostly in Latin America. That's correct so far, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
And and is there thought to expand into other parts of the world that often attract folks as immigrants from into the states?
So eventually, that's something that will likely happen. What I would say is there's so much yet to build without necessarily having to move to that. We want to be the financial partner for the immigrant family, and that means we need to we need to solve for most of the friction points that they have today across financial services, and um, that includes credit, not just debit. That includes improving the international aspect, helping the family member that still lives in Latam have better access to services. That includes also in the U.S. doing doing more for our users in terms of other services that we want to offer. Um, Longer term, the way I think about it is I mean, there's so much yet to do that we're gonna continue to pursue different opportunities.
Awesome, awesome. Anything you wanted to add, Abiel, before I move us in a different direction?
The only thing I would add is just double clicking on the aspect of, when you serve a Hispanic immigrant in the U.S., they tend to be the economic backbone of the family in Latin America, right? And so right now we we give them the rails to send them money, but if you think about the money that is being sent, there's usually a job to be done with that cash. And it's not only like getting the cash and putting it under the mattress in Mexico. That cash is used to pay for services, to pay a mortgage, for many other things, right? And so um, the way that's getting done right now, especially with the brick and mortar players like Western Union, the immigrant goes to a brick and mortar store in the States, the relative picks it up at a brick and mortar store in Mexico, and then, has to go to a different store to pay a specific service. So there's many opportunities to streamline that flow in a digital way. And it obviously requires hard work. So I think that's why also just staying focused on this demographic in the short term is going to allow us to solve those deeply rooted problems much better, and just gain more customer love, right? Which is what we're always trying to increase.
One thing to note as well is that this family in the U.S. is also a multi generational household. So if you think about the kids that are growing up American but from immigrant parents,
Yep.
in many ways, this new generation has access to some of the best opportunities in the world, but they are also competing against Americans that have a lot of information that that family just doesn't have. So a key thing that we're always trying to answer is how can we better help those kids prepare to succeed in the US as they grow up, as they go to college for the first time, as they get a new car for the first time. So there's a lot we need to build on that front as well.
In terms of there's both what you all have told me and what I've seen working with you, and then obviously what you hear about founders of startups and the crazy train that it can be. How are you both feeling now? The work's not over, but have things and you put a pretty big push to kind of to get things to where they are. Has it gotten a little easier? Is it just as hard, but for different reasons? Kind of how you feeling as leaders?
I would say that it's always going to get harder in some areas and it's going to get easier in others. But so as leaders, the fact that it becomes hard is a good sign that you're scaling, I think. If you don't, if you're in a place where you feel like your growth is just not happening, I think that's a warning sign that you might be too complacent with your expectations on the business. I think right now we're always going through one next challenge and one next challenge. I don't see that happening. I don't see that becoming less intense even after we IPO. Like it's always there's always going to be something else that has our attention, and it's a new problem that we've never solved before, so it's always going to have that element of being hard. At the same time, I feel like, at least emotionally, we've been able to cope with those challenges in a better way. We get more resilient the more we build, and I think we have an amazing team where we can depend a little bit more on other people to help shoulder that burden, whereas before it was only us. Um, yeah.
I would, yeah, I would echo that. I think as a business succeeds, and we can raise more capital, um, we can do more things. Have additional lines of revenue, solve more of the problems for our customers. So to Andres's point, I think the complexity always increases, but I see our job as creating the system that can deal with that complexity, so that our individual job doesn't scale linearly in complexity with you know the operations of the company, right? If we create the right system, then the information that we need to absorb to make the right decisions doesn't increase exponentially, right? If we don't, then yes, we're just drowned in a lot of things, and we don't have clarity, right? um, that from the company building level. I think for me at a personal level, it's gotten easier because I think, like most things in life, that transition period was not easy, like the first year as a founder. I think before launching, given that we're in fintech, we can't have MVPs out in the, like, we're building a bank account, right? So like you can only like build a real one. And so
Right.
for 1 year, you raise money, you hire a team, and uh, you just hope that your market hypothesis is correct, right? And there's no real validation until you actually launch. So I think that year was a bit stressful in that end. Um, with time, I think market validation helps. So you start realizing that, like, you actually are capable of doing things with traction. I think that helps you get rid of a few limiting beliefs, and ultimately, I think something that changed for me, we started I met Andres in 2021. Back then, I think a lot of people were starting companies, and like there was a lot of fundraising news, and it felt easy, and people almost wanting to make a quick buck. I think with the hardship that we went through with regards to the migration, and the limitations that we ran into with our first product, um, that gave me appreciation for just the fact that building a business is hard, and you see results over the long term. That's when things compound. And so then I spend a lot of time thinking about how, like, I want to make sure that my day to day, that I enjoy my day to day, that I'm happy, that I take care of myself, so that I can do this for 10, 20 years, right? And that's when you can build cool things, right? So
And
It,
and and that was exactly what I was about to say. Was I remember our discussions, both you and I, Abiel, one on one, and then also when I got to meet Andres, uh, and just how committed you both were to that part of your own health, wellness, happiness, and not at all putting it above what the business needed, but at least on equal footing, I think. And I was really impressed with the commitment to that, and the it didn't seem like it was just like fits and starts. Didn't seem like you guys were burning out, and then, oh god, I got to take a time off, right? It would seem like there was always a bit more balance in there, at least as an outsider. And I thought, gosh, that this feels sustainable and healthy in a lot of ways. So it's really great to see that was not only good for you all, it's good for the business, and you're holding on to that.
yeah, I would say, like, if the goal is to optimize the company, then the way to get there has to be optimizing yourself, right? And there's really no way to take shortcuts on that. And being in a roller coaster where you're burning yourself constantly is not going to get to the like optimal outcome for the company either. So it's a very rational decision to to do it this way, I would say.
yeah, I like to say that burnout is not, like, I'm very grateful that burnout is not productive, Because if the state of burnout was productive, then I'd have a real dilemma between like, you know,
Yeah.
like I want the business to succeed, but I want to take care of myself. But the reality is like it is not. So like the company does better when you're doing well, right?
Yeah.
Something that I'm very appreciative of is Andres had a baby in year one. I gained a lot of appreciation for Andres being able to set boundaries to take care of that, and then it allowed me to do other things. Like right now, I play drums in a band in New York, and I don't think that would happen if Andres hadn't had a baby and I hadn't seen him be able to like cope with both responsibilities, right?
Yeah, children, family, it puts a whole different perspective on priorities and carving out focus time for all the things that really matter. And I think good on you, Andres, for doing a great job of that. And I also think you guys have, you know, literally dispelled some of the myths, right? You know, it's like you can start a company from scratch. You can scrap it and redo it and start again, and you can, you know, have a healthy lifestyle within that. You can build a successful company, you know, for the right reasons, you know, serving you know, a needed population. So I think it's a great model for other entrepreneurs to at least be aware of, because I think sometimes there's that group think, or is that grind 24 hours to get that unicorn thing that you know is, there's other ways to do it. So I think that's amazing. Something I didn't ask you that we probably should have kicked off the whole discussion today on is why'd you choose the name Comun?
So the idea of Comun, so when we serve immigrants that come from Latin America, Latinos in the U.S., and when you think about the term Latinos, it's really not a monolith. There's many different people that fit that profile in the U.S., including myself and Abiel. Um, some people come from different countries, different subcultures of that, different social backgrounds, like economic backgrounds. Um, but I think one thing that became very clear the more we dove into this user persona is that most people came to the US with a single goal, which is to help the family succeed. So in all cases, it was this feeling that my success is not tied to my personal success, but it's tied to the success of my family as a whole. And that means I'm carrying way more burden of responsibility than your typical person. Um, and Comunis is about that mission of helping you help your loved ones. So I think that's Comun means common. I think that's what brings us together. Like that's the one thing we all have in common when it comes to immigrants living in the U.S.
That is a fantastic way to end our chat today. I really appreciate you guys and the work that you're doing. It's been a pleasure to have you on today. It's been a pleasure knowing you and working with you over the years. And we will put the links for the company so folks can find you, and keep up the good work in perpetuity, because the world and your communities and all of us, we need it. So thank you both for your time today, and keep it up.
Thank you so much, Aaron.
Aaron.
All right. Have a good day.
You too.
The Trailbreaker podcast is created by Aaron Feinberg with production support provided by Michael Morey. More interviews and videos can be found at aaronfeinberg.com.